Well, let's go to Julia Gillard's news conference now. It was open-ended. It went on for as long as she felt the questions were still coming, and rather than say she got as good as she got, she seemed to give better than she got in most cases. What did you think, Jacqueline?
Yeah, I thought it was a really strong, really great performance by Gillard, actually. And I think most of the journalists in that room, left at least, if not believing her story, then certainly having a lot of respect for the way she handled those questions. And I noticed, talking about the sort of public perception, because it was a very complex story. The details are quite difficult to get your head around, it's always hard to know how much the average voter is sort of paying attention to these things, particularly if they don't read the papers. But I did notice that in the letters pages of The Age and The Australian yesterday, so both quite different readerships, overwhelmingly people were writing in positive stuff about Gillard and the fact that she faced down her critics and did it that way. So I think it played well for her. Some people say there are still questions, but I mean, we were both there. We sat there. Everybody asked every single question that they could possibly think of.
Though it has been suggested since, Andrew, that apart from journalists at The Australian, the rest of you really haven't got your heart in it.
Yeah, well, I was personally affronted with this because I thought, well, of the questions that actually came up during that press conference, the ones that were forensic and referred to primary documents weren't from journalists at The Australian. And God bless them, I love my brothers and sisters at The Australian. I love all newspaper people. But, I had the documents and I was going through the documents and the heart of this issue, as I saw it, was the difference between what she saw described once as a slush fund and whether that was actually could be regarded as acceptable given what she had written in the objects of the association. So I was going through that, and her eventual thesis, her contention was that what she had done, even though she was rather disappointed in herself for describing it as a slush fund, that it was consistent with the objects of the association that she doesn't deny writing.
And isn't that the key word, that she was setting up an association, and then it's for the association to set up accounts beyond that?
Well, that's why she never liked this notion of a trust fund, because a trust fund has a fiduciary element to it. So she's setting up an association. She never said, and she says that she didn't set up any of the bank accounts that were used and abused.
But then there's nobody complaining about the slush fund. I mean, I think one way of understanding this story and getting it sort of corralling this story is to see that the fund she set up, everybody knew what it was for. Call it a slush fund, call it a re-election fund, whatever its fancy name, and whatever its slippery objectives, and the objectives are incredibly vague. Everybody knew what it was for. It was to fund the re-election of a certain faction of the AWU, and the companies paying into it have never complained, and the workers paying into it have never complained. The problem was there is an allegation that Wilson stole from the fund. Now, the only way of smearing Gillard is to say that she facilitated or benefited from those alleged thefts. And there has never been any evidence of that. There are no complaints about the setting up of the association, or the work of the association, or the funding of the association. She should have done it as an official job for her firm. She did it on the side as a freebie for her then partner. But the problem are thefts from the alleged thefts from that fund.
But I think before you get to that point, I think that there is a problem around the officials holding out that association as being for workplace safety.
They never did.
Seeking. Well, they did. I mean,
look. Everybody understood what it was for. I'm not saying these are nice ideas, these funds. They're in the union movement everywhere, and everybody knew what it was for. It had a fancy name.
I'm not sure
it has fancy objectives, but they knew what it was for.
I asked the Commissioner for Consumer Affairs in WA. I mean, they're the ones who basically looked at this in another form, another commissioner years back, and I asked them whether it was consistent with being an election fund for union officials. And the nub of it is it probably is, right? And so it would get through. But these are so vague as to allow lots of things. Now, what actually happened back in the early 90s is that people were being employed. I mean, we learnt this through an FOI and the WA fraud squad investigation. And you can see that some of these companies did pay these officials $36 an hour at a maximum of 54 hours a week to come on and be sort of workplace safety people. So there was some of the objects...
They were buying peace on their website.
Well, you know, and consequently they could never get anyone to make a complaint. But anyway, that's another story.
Complaints. The only people complaining a long time afterwards is...
The next question is, has she put it away for good? Tony Abbott's response to that, I think, is maybe, maybe not. Here he is.
Lots of people will be looking at that transcript. They'll be coming to a position on whether these issues have now been put to bed, and let's see what conclusion they come to.
Who is he talking about? Who are the lots of people who will be poring over the transcript and then it's in their hands as to whether it goes further?
Well, it wasn't him from the start because he didn't want to even look at it, or he hadn't read the transcript. And Lisa Wilkinson in that interview actually really got quite testy with him. I know it was early in the morning.
Well, they won't nominate the questions that need to be asked.
No.
Exactly.
There are just questions. But this is the West Wing, isn't it? This is the West Wing. Look, wasn't it Alan Alda playing the part of the presidential hopeful who was pro-nuclear and there was a nuclear accident, and finally, to clear the air, he held a press conference and he exhausted the questions. This is straight out of the
Julia
West
Gillard
Wing,
picked up on an American comparison as well. She said that the treatment that she'd been subjected to is similar experience to Barack Obama. Here she is.
Look, it does worry me that we live in an age where a number of years later, people in America can be wandering around saying President Obama wasn't born in America and did you know he's a Muslim? Yes, it does worry me that that's where politics has got to, that things that are demonstrably untrue, indeed absurd, are circulated and recirculated and recirculated, and somehow, at least in some section of the population, manage to worm their way in to become the orthodoxy.
I think it's a bit different because it does go. There's a little more substance to this than than saying Barack Obama hasn't got a passport or a birth certificate or whatever. There's some substance to it.
Absolutely. I mean, she did a very clever job in that press conference of conflating the kind of wild conspiracy theories and the really, really vile stuff on the internet about her, and with, you know, the sort of birthers campaign in America. I mean, these things are totally different. For a start, we were only talking about it because these issues to do with her past were reported by a national newspaper. There was new information that brought the story forward. And she answered those questions. I think she answered them well. But there was no newspaper editor in the country that was not going to publish the transcript of that outgoing interview she had with Slater and Gordon in 1905.
It was a magnificent get
And
by
I mean,
Australian.
you know, to conflate that with scuttlebutt and vile, gross, misogynistic stuff on the internet was just, you know, a wrongful comparison.
But that is also happening. I mean, there's the vile stuff on the internet.
But no, who reads that stuff?
But she's done this remarkable press conference, but it's not going to drive a stake through the heart because this campaign is not being run by sensible calculation over what did or didn't happen. It's being run by very deep political passions, and presumably it will continue.
All right.